Okay. Hi everyone, welcome back to another Youth Commedia video for you guys. I'm Lady Kayla O'Connell, and this is our guest today. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I am Lucetta Di Cosimo, and I don't perform commedia, but I write commedia scenarios.
And this is why we need her. So, as you all know at this point, instead of doing a regular performance, you will be writing scenarios for this particular Youth Commedia class. That being said, I know that not all of you are going to have experience in doing that. So what I want to take this video and do is we will talk with Lucetta and figure out, we'll have some questions and some explanations and things like that, and you'll also have a worksheet in your workbook to go over and remind you of the important parts of which we discuss. So first things first, I think the first question I want to ask is, where does the initial idea for a scenario come from? Or at least for you?
For the genre or personally when I write scenarios?
How about both?
Okay. So, the original idea of a scenario comes from early 16th century when, and during the Renaissance, when people started writing in Italy plays based on Roman comedies of Plautus, which were in turn based on the new comedy scenarios of ancient Greece. And they were basically first sitcoms and rom-coms. And they were written not by professional playwrights, they were written by amateurs and performed by amateur actors. And they were very long, like 6-7 hours long in 5 acts. And then when they ran out of amateur actors, the amateur authors started hiring professional actors, and who decided that they can do it better because they're professionals, and they could. So those amateur written, very long classics-based plays were called commedia erudita. When professionals took over, shortened it to 3 acts and down to 3 to 4 hours, they were started being called commedia dell'arte. Dell'arte means artisanal or professional comedy. Now, as people know, people in theater and performing arts know, competition is fierce. And depending where you are, so is censorship. As the actors realize they kind of need to guard their IP from rival troupes and other amateur authors, and as they needed to avoid censorship as much as possible, their written out play in Commedia dell'arte changed and became kind of like the cliff notes and plot notes and very basic stage directions from which actors who are trained in art of stage improvisation could perform. That kind of protected their IP, because their IP was all in their heads mostly, and protected them from censorship as when they moved from theater to theater and little city-state from city-state and submitted their repertoire to church and local nobles for view and censorship. There was very little to censor because there was really nothing objectionable. And if they really wanted to include something objectionable, it was all be improvised in. So that's kind of where scenario comes from.
Awesome. Okay, and then how about where your scenario ideas come from?
My scenario ideas kind of come from everything. Sometimes it's a joke and it's just ridiculous enough that you can build a situation you can stick it in. Sometimes it's very ridiculous news article. Sometimes it's just somebody mentioned something and said, wouldn't it be great to have a scenario with XYZ, and I just write it. Ultimately, I think because Commedia dell'arte was a very commercial enterprise, they did it to exist and to make money. You can't really rely on inspiration to write them. You just kind of have to sit down and write them. Think of commedia as cooking theater. You have to eat 3 times a day, whether you feel like cooking or not. So.
Okay, great. So I think, let's see. The next question I would have then is, since the students are on such a short time frame,
Mhm.
and also do have the restrictions that they should know about, what would be your advice for finding that joke, that inspiration? Because in being in such a time crunch, it's going to be a little bit more difficult too.
Um, when you watch movies or cartoons or YouTube videos, find something that you can relate to, that makes you laugh, and something you can expand on. Oh, another really cool thing, in the Renaissance comedy, originality was not encouraged and originality was not lauded. It was almost frowned upon. It's like, who are you to make things from scratch and think you can do better than the masters? So a lot of classical scenarios are just reworkings, almost like fan fiction of known plots with new twists. So there's nothing wrong with taking a well-known story and rewriting it as commedia. Like when I teach classes on commedia and how to write scenarios, the very good piece of pop culture is Star Wars. You can totally rewrite it as commedia. The droids become the Zannies, the R2-D2 becomes Brigella, C-3PO is definitely Arlecchino, Captain Solo is Capitano, Leia is, Isabella, who then is, and Luke would be, Flaminio or Orazio, and they're twins separated at birth. And then you have Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader as Becky. And here you go. So just find what inspires you and what you can kind of improvise upon and go from there.
Awesome, and now I'm getting ideas. All right, so then the next question would be where to start. Like, once they get this idea that they want to do, how do you start building on it?
Okay, so what I usually do is, because I write scenarios for troops. So I write scenarios for a pre-existing group of people, which kind of gives you some constraints. At the same time, it's also very liberating. If you write kind of a classical scenario, and the book of reference would be Flaminia Scala's scenarios, his scenarios on average have 11 characters. I think that's a lot to manage. So what I usually do, I look at the troop, and that usually has between 5 and 9 people, occasionally more. But what you do, you assign characters. You have the Vecchi, the Dottore, Pantalone, Tofano, and things like that. You have the lovers, Orazio, Flaminio, Lelio, Isabella, Flaminia, and so on and so on. And you have Zannis, the servants of, you have servetas, the female servants, and you have kind of intermediate characters like the Black Widow, the Capitano, your fortune tellers, your Turkish traders, and things like that. When you assign the characters, you split them into 2 houses. So usually the houses go by the founder, which is Vecchi. So you'll have House of Pantalone, and you have House of Dottore, and you assign the assorted lovers and servants to the houses and leave the houseless characters kind of in the middle. That would be usually Capitano, but occasionally you can also make him a member of a household, whatever works. And then once I have all my characters written out and assigned to houses, I kind of look at them, and because commedia is very formulaic and you're kind of gunning towards that happy ending and as many happy couples as possible in the end, you literally pair them up. So before you even know what the scenario is about, you know who ends up with who. And then once you set that up, you set up romantic complications. Basically, who kind of wants to end up with somebody, but for plot reasons, to be inserted later, that doesn't work out. And that's basically the skeleton of the commedia play. The rest is just details. So that's kind of how I start.
Okay, awesome. And then how do you make the choice onto who goes to which household? Is it based on relationships?
Yes, so there are two types of relationships in commedia. There are familial relationships, and I would include, like, the nurse child also into familial relationships. Like in Romeo and Juliet, you have Juliet and you have her nurse, who's basically for plot device and comic relief, right? And there are romantic relationships, which is, romantic relationships. So how do I assign people into houses? It's really random. Usually we have House of Pantalone and House of Dottore. So each house will have the head of the household, which is the old person, the vecchi. Then those vecchis will have children who are the lovers. So you take, your female lover and your male lover, who would be siblings, and stick them in one house, and take the others and stick them in another house. The vecchi and lovers will have to have servants. So just kind of evenly shuffle it in. Each household does not have to have, a matched pair of boy, girls, of lovers. You can put all the girls in one household and all the boys in the another household. Or you can make Isabella Pantalone's daughter and make her an only child, and make the Torre have like 4 or 5, kids. But it's, when you're just starting out, it's kind of easy to keep it symmetrical. So
Okay,
that's kind of how I assign them.
awesome. Okay. Let's see. And then I guess the next step would be, now that we have the idea, the basic inspiration, right, and we have how to start it with the separation of the characters and whatnot, how about fleshing it out? What tips would you have for fleshing out a scenario?
Okay. So first of all, when you look, if you're writing a 16th century based scenario, there are a couple of unwritten rules they go by. So when you assign your relationships, some things they did in 16th century, it was very ageist society and very like classist society. So people of this different age categories will not end up together. People of different classes will not end up together. So for example, old Dottore may court Isabella, who's young and beautiful, but that relationship will totally not work out, and she will end up with, Flaminio or Capitano, somebody of her, age and class. The relationships between vecchi and servants or servetas and lovers or servants and servetas also do not work out because they are of different classes. If it does work out, it's because one of them is, young noble in disguise, down on his luck or her luck and working as a servant in the household. So that's kind of one way to start. Now, there's a lot of in commedia which is totally inappropriate for modern day theater and kind of frowned upon. So those rules are just guidelines, and feel free to break them. But when you're starting out, it's kind of easier because it keeps the scenario flowing easier. How do I flesh it out? So commedia is all about resolution of conflict, and conflict arises trying to fulfill a romantic relationship. So it almost invariably starts that Isabella is in love with, let's say, Orazio, but something prevents their marriage from happening. It could be a very valid reason. For example, their houses are locked in this generation-long vendetta, like with Romeo and Juliet, or it could be something really, really, really stupid, like when Dottore and Pantalone were like in the university together. Pantalone ate the last cookie and Dottore vowed never to talk to him again, or something insane like that. So kind of, the good thing about comedy, it's literally anything goes. So you can make it as serious or as ridiculous as you like. When I do it, I just basically literally write down whatever comes into my head. Why can't they get married? And then you need to flesh that out a little bit more. So what usually happens, the young lovers will engage the help of servants to solve this conflict, and the servants are incompetent or very, very competent, but only to accomplish their own goals. And then you introduce a layer of complications, and at the end, this layer of complications gets resolved, however, by whatever means you see feasible. And then the final scene is usually one big happy marriage when like 4, 5, 6 couples happily walk off stage. Now, the good thing is about comedy, as I said, it's okay to go make it make it completely ridiculous. Think like a lot of Japanese anime may have a very like epic storyline, but the individual episodes are just insane. So that's perfectly fine. Deus Ex Machina is perfectly fine. You don't have to think about any character motivations or character development. So I think a good inspiration would be to go and watch like several episodes of old Warner Brothers cartoons and kind of go from there. So there's really no restraints in what little details you want to stick in your scenario, as long as you have basic framework worked out. I don't know if that helps, but.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay, so now we've talked about, you know, the inspiration and starting it and fleshing it out. The next logical step would be the conclusion. Now you talked about, you know, everything ends happily. It resolves the conflicts, you know, weddings abound. Are there any other things that could be incorporated into the ending of a scenario?
Like what?
Well, let's see. I guess what elements as a whole should go into the ending of a scenario, especially a short one?
Okay. Basically everything is resolved. Whatever obstacle you put in the beginning why the lovers can't get married, that goes away. And that depends what it was. For example, if they can't get married because Orazio is poor, you know, he finds a treasure, or his Pantalone's long lost son, and he's now rich, right? If they cannot get married because, you know, I don't know, you cursed Isabella with some bizarre melody, that gets lifted. However it gets lifted, that's throughout the plot. Also, all of the other conflicts get resolved. So for example, long lost siblings will be revealed, long lost twins will be reunited, people kidnapped by pirates will be unkidnapped or arrive in the head of their own pirate crew. You know, if Orazio was pining like after Pantalone's Servetta, you find out she's not actually Servetta, but, you know, but Isabella, and stuff like this. So basically you kind of try to resolve and tie loose ends as much as possible. It sounds very intimidating, but since you can be absolutely ridiculous in how you do it, it's not really that bad as it sounds.
Awesome. Okay. All right, let's see. We got through all of that. I guess that pretty much sums it up. I mean, they're not going to be required to do a full-length play, which is going to help with, you know, especially for a first-time writing. So are there any other tips, tricks, recommendations, anything like that that you would have to give the students when writing scenarios?
Just start writing. Most of my scenarios literally write themselves, and I kind of just jot them down as they happen. So don't be afraid of the blank piece of paper, just start writing, and if you don't like it, that's what editing is for. Don't waver in writing down those relationships. Commedia is all about relationships. So determining who ends up with whom is the main step. So once you put that down, don't waver from that. That's much easier, because when you're getting lost in the plot intricacies, you can also look at, you know, say, okay, you know, we cannot do that because Isabella needs to end up with Orazio in the end. So that's another thing. Oh, another thing is when you write your scenes, the character entrance is motivated by the plot. The character exits are completely random and unmotivated by everything. So if you have a character just kind of lingering on stage without anything to do, it's perfectly okay for them to say, well, I got nothing to do, and kind of sashay out. It's perfectly fine. So you only have to account for motivation of kind of like half motivation of the characters, unlike in modern theater when you have to literally justify everything. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. And also it should be fun, you know. It's
Right.
That's why you're doing it.
Exactly. This is all volunteer, even though they still have homework. So, just an important point I want to bring out is that as well is that if your first idea does not pan out, do not panic. It happens. I guess the easiest explanation for that is last Pennsic, my troupe had written, and my troupe Il Titolo Professorio had written an entire scenario, 3-act scenario, and when we got there to rehearse it, we realized we hated it and had to rewrite an entire 3-act scenario in 2 days, rehearse it, and perform it. Sometimes that first idea that sounds like a great idea doesn't always work, but that's okay. It's okay to go back and edit and change and say, you know what, I hate this, and try again.
Yes, it's all improvised anyway. And another thing is, you don't have to worry about dialogue. It's so much easier. You just kind of have to jot down notes of what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Dialogue and the Lotzi, the dialogue will come later. And that's part of the improvisation part.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can hint towards things that need to happen in dialogue so that it makes sense. Of course, absolutely. That's what the plot points are for. But it's not just your regular run-of-the-mill script. So it should be a lot easier.
Yep.
Right. And I think that about covers everything that I wanted to talk about. So thank you, Lucetta, for all of your help and wisdom here.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me to talk about this stuff. I love it. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you were able to do this for everybody. I really appreciate it. And check your workbook, see if there's an assignment, and we will see you tomorrow.